right, Zig coming in on the top 10. The show we have Dave Nagler of As for the Future. Dave is a New York-based singer-songwriter musician who plays in a plethora of projects, including his latest one, As for the Future. As for the Future is a new Brazilian music-inspired group, drawing on various styles including bossa nova, samba, MPB, and combining them with rock, jazz, folk, and soul influences. The group mixes their distinctive sound with vibrant original lyrics, which is super fascinating, especially as a lane in songwriting, because diving into Brazilian music, you hear this lush, beautiful chords and harmony, and it sounds so pretty, but when you learn a little bit about the history and what's behind these lyrics, you learn how dark and heavy they are, and how the music was actually used to bring that out, right? And me and Dave get into that in our conversation. But before we get to that, we're going to listen to a tune. This is Encyclopedia of Songs by As for the Future. Encyclopedia of Songs is the tune. As for the Future is the group. Now, if you dug what you heard, the album comes out June 14th on all streaming platforms. June 14th, there is also a release show. If you follow As for the Future on Facebook, Instagram, and check out their websites, all the details for the release show will be there. It is in New York for anyone who's not there, so if you're traveling or passing through, check it out. Or if you're from there, go check it out. This was a really, really interesting conversation with Dave, and I'm excited to share it with you. But before we do that, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Dave and sharing their insights with you. Now, without further ado, this is my conversation with Dave from As for the Future. Well, to get into it, jumping into As for the Future and what you're doing, you're in a lot of things, man.
True, yes.
And because I just started by when Howard sends me something, all I do is I just listen to the record and I go through that a few times and just hear what this is. But then I remember seeing your name a few times in some other projects that Howard sent me. Can you tell me about working with Esther?
Yeah, sure. Well, Esther is she's amazing. She's like a New York artist, performance legend. And so she was someone that I became familiar with, probably a lot of other people did, which is I saw Stranger Than Paradise, and she was just super cool. But then I saw her play live a bunch of times in maybe the late 90s when she was playing in New York, and she had solo albums out and stuff. So I was familiar with her vibe and her material and everything. And I've done a show on and off since 2015 called The Oracle Show, which is a themed piano bar show. and so I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but hopefully
that's perfectly where
hopefully we'll get back on. but it's a themed show. So like, for instance, if the theme is like boys and girls, it would be any song with boy or girl in the title. So that's the gist of it. And so I've done that now. I've done 33 of those shows on and off since 2015. And I knew that Esther played with another amazing performer that I play with, Tammy Faye, Starlight. And so I asked Tammy, do you think she'd be interested in being a guest at the Oracle Show? And Tammy said, oh yeah, I think so. So we met, and so she guested at my show, and then we talked some more, and she, I sort of knew that she had the show I Hate Memory in the works. And so she said, would you be interested in, being one of the musicians in that show? And I was like, absolutely. And so we've been working together pretty consistently since then, which I think is somewhere around 2019 or so.
That project's pretty heavy, man. The I Hate Memory project.
Yeah, it's great, and for me, who's someone who has always been fascinated by the New York downtown arts world. It's really illuminating. It's a really illuminating show, and the songs are great, and sort of her take on things is very particular to herself, and I think that's really valuable and interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree because I remember I chatted with her and her like perspective of like just having all these like the what was the theater uh the like just kind of the not improv theater but it was just like
The squat theater.
the squat, yes, the squat theater,
Yep.
and like just
Yep.
her take on that and being, it was really really fascinating. So did you
Yeah,
kind of grow?
there's an amazing thing. I should add this. There's an amazing thing. If you go online, there's a listing. There's like a kind of squat theater retrospective website, and they have a listing of every concert that they had at the squat from its beginning until it ended, and it's amazing. You should totally check that out if you haven't
Oh
seen
man,
it.
I haven't. Holy
Yeah,
crap, that would have
yeah,
helped with that. I looked it up and like
yeah,
I couldn't find anything. Like maybe I spelled it wrong, or like maybe like it wasn't active when that. But that sounds
yeah,
like a site that's been up for a minute. Um,
yeah. It's around, but yeah, it's really cool and really interesting to see. So.
that yeah, because she was telling me like screaming Jay Hawkins and shit, and like
Yeah.
some wild performers there. Did you? So were you like in New York? Did you grow up in New York? Like, what's your history with New York?
So I grew up in New Jersey, the town of Wayne, New Jersey, which is half an hour outside the city. And so, I would come to the city growing up, but not for a lot of. I mean, I wasn't like going downtown and hanging out in my preteens or anything. Basically, my parents would take me to classical music concerts at Lincoln Center, or we'd go to Broadway shows, or we'd like go in for dinner. But I didn't really, and all the concerts I was going to at that time were basically like Jersey arena concerts. I would say that maybe the smallest venue I would have been to see a show at would have been like Radio City Music Hall, not exactly, a shoebox. So, but and then when I started thinking about going to college, I ended up going to Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. But I toured the NYU campus, and I sort of, was like, oh my God, this is the village, this is amazing, and that was around the time that I started. This would have been like when I was about maybe 16 or something, and I was listening to the Velvet Underground around this time, and so New York, the New York mythology sort of started to kind of come alive for me. And then right before I left for college, I had a band called Spontaneous Generation that was based in Wayne. And we did covers, but we were doing a lot of originals at the time, and we started playing in the Village in New York, and so we played clubs like Kenny's Castaways and The Bitter End, and so I kind of decided pretty early on that, like, all right, I'm going to go to Chicago area for school, and then I'm going to come right back and move into the city, which took a while. I ended up, because the proximity to, New York wasn't too far, I just sort of lived at home for a number of years and worked on music there and stuff. But eventually I moved to Brooklyn, and I've been here since 1999. So, but I kind of almost always wanted to live here.
Yeah. Yeah, so did you start with piano or guitar? What was your main?
I started with piano.
Okay.
Yeah, I started piano kind of like, there were sort of like kind of general music lessons when I must have been like 3 or 4 or something. Like really young person music lessons. And then I started taking what was, I guess, piano lessons somewhere around maybe 5 or 6. And then, but then around the time I was maybe 9, my mother has 4 brothers, and they're all musical, and 2 of them have a band. One plays drums and one plays guitar. And the one who plays guitar started teaching me guitar. So he taught me like a handful of songs and chords. And, I was doing that while I was having, somewhat intense classical piano training. And then somewhere around the time I was like 11 or so, everything just kind of clicked in terms of like, oh, I'm doing the same thing, but just a little different. And so, started playing chords on piano the way I would play chords on guitar, and started playing notes on guitar the way I would play notes on piano, and everything just kind of went from there, I guess.
That's interesting because like I feel like a lot of us musicians, I guess it is, kind of start with piano, because it's easy.
Yeah.
Mechanically, it's easy. You plunk it down. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
much more
Yeah, totally.
finesse to it. But as far as like a 3-year-old understanding how it works, they get it compared to a guitar.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's like that.
And also, like you treat it in a certain way. Like I saw, we were at a friend's apartment this weekend, and they had a piano that was all like a little bit beat up, and I think maybe like one of their kids sort of beat it up a bit. And I was like, you know what? I totally beat up my piano when I was like 2. Like taking. Taking quarters and chipping off the keys a little bit, and so anyway,
Smacking it with like a stick. What's it sound like with this?
yeah. So
bashing balls against it, like whatever rattles. Like,
yeah.
but what's interesting though is like that kind of like the classical like music agenda that's hidden within the practice, of learning piano. And seeing that unfold to guitar, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So, like when you're now in groups and learning songs, guitar becomes the main, right? Like as far as like before you moved out, your first band you were talking about, that was on guitar, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I sort of I played piano like solo, like I would kind of like sing songs and and play piano. But when I wanted to be in a band, which started, I was in my first band when I was 12.
Yeah.
It was like 2 guitars and drums. I wanted to play guitar. Like I grew up watching MTV and in its very early years, and I just thought playing guitar was the way to go. Like I enjoyed playing piano and keyboards, but guitar was just cooler. So.
No, for sure, definitely. No, there's no doubt about it. But I mean, like when you learn more about music, you're like, wait, piano's kind of where it's at. Shit. Like, but so when you went to Chicago, for what initially were you going to school for?
I went to school for film, and so I went.
Yeah?
They have a radio, TV, film major, and I think the idea was to go for kind of like film production, like to go into filmmaking, because it just seemed to me that it might be a little bit more of like I hate to use this word, but like realistic career path than music, because I was a pop and rock musician, and I wasn't. I wasn't an amazing guitar or piano player. I was into songwriting. I was into singing, but I was into rock music, and so I didn't know like. I didn't think like, oh, well, I'm going to make a career in rock music. I mean, I sort of had dreams of that, but I didn't think that was going to happen or anything. And so film was the major, and I was interested in film production, but then I realized that wasn't what I was interested in. So I got more into like English and literature classes, and then and into film theory and criticism, so like more film history stuff. And so that was kind of how I ended up. That was how I ended up graduating from Northwestern, was with a degree in film kind of theory and criticism, with like a if we didn't have minors or anything, but that would have been in like comparative literature, I would say, because I took a lot of comparative literature classes.
That's like, there's definitely, it's a fascinating field for sure. Like, and like the combination of those two makes a lot of sense, because as you're learning about the history of these films and where they come from and what they mean and what they've meant after they've existed, and then like kind of analyzing that, it comes, I feel like analyzing literature and history on that sense makes that more clear, Yeah.
Totally. They both kind of just sort of opened up for me in my teens. I mean, I became a big fan of foreign films in like my early teens, I would say. So I was watching those all throughout high school, and then towards the end of high school, I got more into the idea of literature. There's there would be a book or two that sort of changed my view on something. Reading like Crime and Punishment or something was like, whoa, oh my God. And so like, things start to sort of open up from there. And so I just went with that. So
no, that makes it's like, it's fascinating. Like the kind of mode of expression and like the arc of narrative that kind of funnels down through technology to the root where it kind of comes back to like literature, you know?
Yeah,
It's
totally. Yeah.
and it's one of those things as like a young kid, like you'd be like, you're reading a book? Huh, whatever. You know what I mean? And like you kind of
Right, yeah.
as that young kid, you're like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. But once you like understand that thing you like and you trace it to the
Yeah.
root, you're like, wait a minute, this is like
Yeah, totally. And yeah, and you know, and also, but also for me, you know, songwriting has been not always, but it's very often it's storytelling.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and so that was sort of a huge thing for me. In some ways, I kind of got, I don't know if this is totally true, but all of these different mediums that I was into, for me, have often just been a way to sort of like funnel that into songwriting. So, you know, the way films inspire songs and the way books and poetry inspire songs, you know, so that's, or to be specific, lyrics for songs. So,
right. No,
yeah.
like there's so much to kind of like take in to try to like express in any form of media, like or expression, right? So like with songwriting, when did you first start dabbling in songwriting? When did that really come like your like collecting all these outside sources and like I want to funnel it to the thing I do, which is songwriting. And so when did like songwriting become yours?
Well, there's sort of a couple different stops along the way. I mean, the first was I think I wrote my first song somewhere when I was like 7 or 8 or something, and it was just this very simple piano song. I think I remember there was like, I was into the Eagles when I was like 8 or something. And I want to say, you know, maybe they had a song that was in the key of C, like Best of My Love or something like that. And I remember sort of, and I could play a C chord on the piano. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I can write a song then. And it was like kind of something kind of really simple, you know, like the song was called like Today or something. And I think the hook might have been like, it's okay today, you know, something like that. And so that was sort of the first, you know, thing. And then when my band started when I was like 12 in like 1985, I probably wrote a song that was, you know, again, pretty simple and nothing special, but that was sort of my first stab at that. And then I had a band in high school, and we sort of slowly started writing songs. The drummer was a very prolific lyricist. He would give us lyrics, and myself and my guitar player friend Alan would also kind of set them to music and stuff, and we'd sort of go from there. And so during high school, there was just sort of this trajectory of continuing to write songs up until the very end of my senior year, when I would say I would have written the first song that I am proud of, that I would consider a mature a mature work. So, and then it just kept going from there. I wrote a lot of songs in college and afterwards, and here we are. So.
Was the process of with the drummer in your first band, seeing how we would set it to music, was that something that changed how you did it?
Well, he would give us different kinds of lyrics. He was a drummer. He was very into Neil Peart.
Okay. So he's got some Iran,
and so, you know, and of course, and so like Neil Peart is, you know, this very, you know, very impressive drummer, and also, you know, a lyricist. And so I think he sort of was like, okay, I can do this stuff. And so. But I think his lyrics, I think, tended to be they weren't, you know, quite as, you know, literary as or mythological as Neil Peart's lyrics. They tended to be more about like relationships and emotions and stuff. And so, you know, that band was just sort of a mix of the things that we liked, and, you know, at the time. And so, you know, so Rush would have been one of the elements, but I was into like kind of a lot of what I guess would be considered like art rock. So like, you know, Pink Floyd and David Bowie and Roxy Music and stuff like that. And so it was just sort of a hodgepodge of different elements. But but we were also learning as we went. We didn't. I don't know. We don't look back on most of those songs that fondly, at least at that time. So
I don't think anyone looks back on their old stuff fondly. They're like, ah.
no, but I'll say this: like one of our that band sort of reunited actually during the pandemic. We made a record of all the songs that we wrote but didn't record between the years of like 91 to 93. And we liked most of them, so we decided to like make a record of them, and so we did that, and we put it out, and we played a show almost about a year and a half ago, but there's always the possibility of another one in the works. So
that's awesome. How'd it go?
It was good.
Yeah,
it was really good. I mean, it was a reunion for like that whole sort of all of our friends growing up and stuff, but it was really neat. And our bass player for that show is a good friend of mine, Byron Isaacs, who plays in the band The Lumineers, and he was like our bass player for that show, and he was really into it, and it was just really cool. It was a really fun night, and we played at the Bitter End, which was the club that we played at the most in the early '90s, because it's still there and it's still functional, and so that's where we did it.
That's so cool. That's so cool to kind of like cap that and like polish it to the best you can at that time, from that time to this time, and to be able to share it. That's beautiful.
Yeah, totally. And and the key is that we're all still friends. So that's, that was what enabled it to even happen. None of us had like fallen out or anything. So.
Okay, so you go to Chicago, you go to school, you come back, You got this film and like literature, deeper insight than you left with, and then when do you start hitting the pavement as a full-time musician?
Well, let's see. I mean, I will say I've never been a full-time musician until now. Actually, then that was the first time where I'm actually approaching it in that way. When I got back, I worked in retail for a couple of years. There was Borders Books and Music in my hometown, and so I worked there for a couple of years selling music, which was also very important to me because there were all these. You're surrounded by all these CDs, and you're like, "What's this? What's this?"
Yeah,
and so like
by the source.
When I got back, from college, I mean, I think I always sort of viewed myself as, up until that point, it's like, well, I'm a rock musician and I want to play in rock bands and that's what I want to do. But working in Borders, that sort of really kind of like opened my horizon in terms of types of music, which had already sort of started my senior year of college, listening to more sort of experimental jazz and sort of world music and stuff. But living at home and not having any expenses and working at Borders, I just got like a ton of different records in all genres. And so that sort of period, that first couple of years after I got back from college, was like really trying to push the envelope for myself in terms of like what I wanted to do. And since that point, after that point, over the next, like, let's say 10 years, I would say there were a bunch of times where I was like, well, we play power pop music pretty well. Let's do that. And I'm still writing songs in that mode. And so, we kind of, that band, which was called Stretch when I first got back, and then eventually we changed our name to Nova Social. It was a rock band for sure, but it involved kind of more of these sort of interesting, elements that I'd sort of come into contact with over those last, couple of years in the mid-90s.
So diving from one, I remember Borders was like that as far as the music selection. I remember like you had the button where you can hear some of the CD. You know what I mean? And that was the place, man.
Yep.
But so then when you're diving into jazz and some experimental jazz and world music,
right.
what type of artists initially were you kind of like digging? Because like depending on like is it like Coltrane? Are we talking like when he was getting more experimental, or like what would that look like, or was it even more out?
Yeah. Yeah, Coltrane, but I'll say the first artist that made me sort of really love and appreciate jazz was Charles Mingus.
Mm.
That music kind of, because here's the thing. When I was in high school, I mean, I'll say this, I liked Miles Davis because it was very it's very chill and evocative, and particularly the Gil Evans stuff and the and the stuff he was doing in the mid '60s, but Charles Mingus was the first one that kind of struck me as like, oh, this is like an artist who makes these compositions that are interesting and they come from a very specific place. You could read about them and you could find out like what inspired him to write these pieces, whether they were, an homage to, an older jazz artist, or they were about science, or they were about protest, and so I think it was that his jazz works could be conceptual. Like that was a huge thing for me. I loved conceptual things in music, like I loved Pink Floyd's The Wall, and I loved David Bowie's many different, phases that he went through and stuff. And so Charles Mingus kind of resonated for me on a similar level. And so I got into that, and then that was the starting point. And then from there, it would just be different artists. I was like, Cecil Taylor, like, what is this? What's going on here? And then digging into it and like, oh yeah, this is really interesting stuff. And like Sun Ra, what's going on here? And so it was just a matter of sort of listening to a lot of different stuff, but kind of just broadening my horizons in terms of that, and not necessarily knowing how it was going to affect my music. I did write a song about Albert Ayler at one point, because it was inspired by him and the sort of myth behind him. But apart from that, you never know how that stuff is going to influence you necessarily. You just think it's cool and you go with it.
Was it? What what was the song about Albert Ayler? Is this a project?
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! It's a little. It's actually it's very crass now that I think. I mean, it's really like at the time it seemed like, oh, I could do this, but it was called Floating Al because he was found in the river, and so the kind of chorus lyric was they found him in the river, which is like, oh my god, I can't believe I wrote that. That's so embarrassing. but I was fascinated by him. I was fascinated by the sounds that he made, like the places that he took the listener to, and then one day he just he was just gone. And to me, I think that was really, I found that really, really odd and interesting, and to the point where I was like, I want to write a song about this. And so I kind of like when whatever some version I think of Nova Social might have played that in like the late '90s, and the way we would do it maybe is I would just like play the song on guitar and sing it, and like the others would be playing free around me.
That's cool.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect for Albert Ayler, man.
Yeah.
That's me and my band. We've been getting really into Albert Ayler because being a Cleveland Cats, and like being a guy from Cleveland, but also all of us were really into Coltrane. Then you learn how he influenced Coltrane and like the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost thing, and you're like, what? Like,
yeah, totally.
And
he's interesting. I mean, like when you get to sort of the later records, they're kind of groovy and stuff. Like he did a lot of different, he took it a lot of different places. So, which is really great.
It's also interesting too, because like, what was I going to say on that? How you read about this person who has this huge, it's you can feel how inspiring it is just reading about it. It's the potential energy of the potential creative energy that just learning about this character can bring your mind. You're like, there's no way like this guy's still doing something somewhere. And then when you learn he's not, like how you just said, and then he's just gone. You're like, shit. You know what I mean? Is there's the rug swept out from under you, and like it's that. So I can totally understand how this song would come to you, or at least the inspiration from it would come to you.
Yeah, and he it's artists kind of create. I guess in a way they help create their own myths, and so like you have this record called Spiritual Unity. First song is Ghosts, and it just like has like and when you hear it. Like as I'm talking about it, I'm remembering, like I'm thinking about these sax lines going through my head while I'm thinking about it and how beautiful they are, and and that's what artists have the power to do, is they have the power to create these sort of lasting, impressions and musical memories that they can just stick with you, and so it's about the music, but then of course it's also about the musician who made the music. So.
One thing that I find interesting talking with you is like and it's making me kind of think about it because I get excited about these same things. Is like when you learn like the history or the underlying concept or philosophical thought process behind an artist or a work. I think that work becomes much more, to me, and it sounds like it is to you, becomes much more potent. You know what I mean? It becomes much more of like this is. Oh man, this is where it's at. You don't know about this, and like after you've done a little bit of research and you learn what this record, the weight that it carries, or or this film, or like how this film is a retelling of this narrative from this standard piece of literature that you never read. You know what I mean? Like, but you should, and then when you read that, you're like, everything's this. It's interesting, like the kind of like human like neuro like spark. The dopamine spike when you can kind of like hear and see where something came from and like what someone has said with that, and I think it just kind of opens that door for someone who's trying to write. Yeah, totally.
It's there's a lot of like what is the artist trying to accomplish here? Did they accomplish it, or if they didn't do it, did they do something else? Like that's sort of kind of a way you can approach. I feel you can approach like any creative endeavor, really.
So, like, kind of with this, like kind of heavy kind of history, where did like the fascination for like samba and bossa nova come from? For looking at As for the Future,
right? Well, I mean, I've been a fan of Brazilian music for, a long time. I want to say the first Brazilian record that I got, there was a series of retrospectives that David Byrne's Luaka Bop label put out. There's one, Brazil Classics 2, O Samba, and I got that when I was in high school. One of those, do you remember Columbia House mail order?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was one of the CDs that I got. You could get like 7 or 8 CDs, which is like at the time like, oh my God, I've hit the lottery, and so that was one of them. And it was fun and groovy and cool, and it was, but it didn't fit into anything else I was listening to. But I was into that David Byrne Ray Momo record, and I liked the last Talking Heads record, Naked, but not a ton. I want to say like I've come back to that record a lot more recently, and I've been like, this record's great, but at the time, I don't know. I was a rock guy. That's really just kind of the easiest way to put it. I was a rock guy, and so I got that record then, and there was that, and then Brazilian music started to kind of become like a little bit of a bigger thing for me. David Byrne's label put out the Os Mutantes compilation in like the late '90s, and that's a kind of way, if you're a rock fan, you can get into Brazilian music for that. I was just speaking with someone yesterday who wasn't that familiar with Brazilian music, who comes from a rock background. I was like, oh well, you should listen to this Os Mutantes record. This is a kind of nice in for that. And also my for a very brief period, I was working in John Lurie's office in New York. My first New York job was doing PR, and I was doing PR for first. It was like maternity wear was the first thing I was doing PR for, which I was like, oh well, not exactly what I envisioned, but okay. But my boss had connections with Bravo networks, which include Independent Film Channel, and so they had two shows that they were promoting. One was the show Split Screen by the indie film producer, author John Pearson. The other one was Fishing with John Lurie's fishing show.
Yeah. That show's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And so it aired on it first aired on the Independent Film Channel in, I guess, 1998. I think that's about right. I don't think it's 97. I think it's 98. So it'd be like spring of 98. And so I helped promote that, and we got all this great coverage, like 4-star reviews in like New York daily papers and stuff, and people loved it. And one of my greatest memories of that period was he, in addition to the fishing show, the Lounge Lizards just recorded a new record, and so so they were starting to play again. They did one of the first shows at the Bowery Ballroom here in New York, and I remember going to that, and that was amazing. And also he had like the Independent Film Channel paid for like a private party or a premiere party for Fishing with John, which was actually at the World Trade Center. It was at Windows on the World in, I guess it would have been spring of '98, and that was amazing. The Lounge Lizards, all the band was there, and I very distinctly, and I've told this to her, I remember Esther Ballant attending, and I told her, I was like, I saw you from across the room at John Lurie's Fishing with John premiere party. But at any rate, so after that, I worked in his office for a little while. Because the Lounge Lizards record was out, I did sort of radio promotion for the Queen of All Years record. And the guy who was sort of running John's Strange and Beautiful music label was this guy, Jerome, and he was a huge Brazilian music fan. And so he had, like, one of those CD books, which was filled with, like, oh my gosh, 100 Brazilian records, between 100 and 150, I would say, different Brazilian music CDs. He was just a huge, huge fan. And so that was my first introduction to Caetano Veloso. And then Caetano Veloso played at, I want to say, the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York. I don't think it was the Beacon. I think it was the Hammerstein, but I could be wrong. Maybe it was the Beacon. I don't remember. Anyway, but it was, but I saw him live. And that was kind of like a big moment for me. And then also in the late 90s, you had Arto Lindsay's solo records that were coming out. Are you familiar with those at all?
No, I'm not. I'll have to...
Okay.
Art of Lindsay, you said?
Sorry, Arto Lindsay.
Arto, okay. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an amazing artist. He was kind of like he had sort of a no-wave band early on called DNA.
Oh, okay.
And then he had
DNA.
sort of,
yeah.
Okay, so he was in DNA, and then the Ambitious Lovers was his sort of '80s duo kind of project, and then he started making these solo records in the '90s, and there's these amazing, mostly English language, some Portuguese, but mostly English language, Brazilian influenced records because he's of Brazilian descent, and also, but very also with the time in terms of a lot of electronic stuff that was going on in New York and stuff, and so very like interesting, challenging, beautiful records, and for a long time those were sort of the kind of high watermark of like English language Brazilian for me. I mean, they still are, but they were kind of like, well, I have no business making music like this because there's this. so I was very kind of intimidated by that. But I would say since 2000, I just got more and more into Brazilian music. There'd be different artists that I would be into, Milton Nascimento and Marcos Valle, and Gilberto Gil. Like these, I started listening to this music a lot. And the thing about Brazilian music, which, you know, I think other people would say the same, is like, you know, you like how it makes you feel. It makes you feel good. It's, you know, it's the music is joyous and beautiful, and it's very rich. I mean, the way these the chords, and, you know, it's very jazzy, and it's all these things. And so I just listened to it more and more. And I had a bit of, I guess what I could say is like a breakthrough, maybe like 6 or 8 years ago, where I started reading translations of a couple different songwriters. One is Chico Buarque, who's amazing, and then another was the guitar player, singer songwriter João Bosco. His lyricist, who unfortunately passed away of COVID during the pandemic, is this lyricist Algier Blanc, and I read translations of both of those lyricists, and I think something just kind of opened up for me in terms of like, okay, you know, they have their thing, and I guess I can have, you know, and it like almost gave me permission to write songs in this style. And then, because I do a lot of like lyric writing separate from songwriting, so I'll write some music, I'll write a bunch of lyrics, and then often what I'll try and do is kind of sort of mate the two, like what I consider sort of speed dating. I'll go like, does this fit with this? And so a lot of the lyrics I started writing around this time, like 8 or so years ago, I was like, I think this could fit, this could work for something like this. And I had a friend, drummer Brian Cantor, who plays on about 2/3 of the As for the Future record, you know, and we talked about, oh, this would be really cool to like start a project that's like Brazilian influenced. And so it all just kind of started happening. And by 2019, I had like a fair amount of songs in place to make it happen, basically.
It's an incredible like one journey with that, because like it's interesting too, because it's a whole field in like another like culture of music, right? So and like, but what I find like interesting with knowing a little bit about Brazilian music is like there's like sonically there's like a different narrative being told in like a lot of these like songs where like it sounds happy, but and like there's these lyrics that, you know, because a lot of those songs were like had to be censored to exist, right? So you get like happy lyrics, but then you get like this kind of clashing music to kind of bring out different narratives, right? So there's like this whole kind of historical like context to these songs, and like from kind of talking with you, that makes sense, like how these seeds would plant in your mind, you know what I mean, and really become a passion project. And that just like the way, like it almost sounds like it was like roots by the time in your mind, by the time you met your drummer here, to start on this project. There
was like a couple factors at the time. I just made in 2017 it came out in 2018. I made a record called The Appointees Volumes 1 and 2, which was songs about Trump cabinet appointees. And so like this is basically like, this is my way of like sort of, you know, processing the election, was to sort of to look into the people who who were going to go along with Trump. Like who were these people? Like what's the sort of digging into their background and their history, and sort of like doing kind of sort of character studies, but also, you know, seeing if anything about them influenced any material. And there are a couple songs on that record that are definitely Brazilian influenced. There's one called The Non-Believers, and there's another called Mechanical Bull. And I played them at a show, and my friend Dave Derby, who actually I saw his band Gramercy Arms last night, he said to me like, "Oh my God, this stuff is like Tropicalia because it's, you know, it's political and there's protesting elements." He said it's like Tropicalia for that reason. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess it is." And so that was another thing that kind of helped me sort of dive deeper, was like just knowing that that I was doing something that to me felt like it was sort of on the right track.
No, I agree with that notion. Like once you like kind of like understand, oh, this shit's heavy, man. It sounds light and
Yep.
beautiful, which you already,
Yep.
which is already appealing, and like, I mean, Tropicalia is different, but like which is still like it's I'm not trying to say it's not, but like it's a different subsection. But like still, once you know, like there's like this weight, it's like poetry. It's like this is very aesthetically like pleasing to my eyes when I read this poem. But why?
Yeah.
And then when you learn that, but why, you're like, oh my god, this is so
Right.
amazing, And like,
Yeah.
so okay, so you guys get this bug, you get the drummer, the context is all there. A lot of these songs are kind of cataloged, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then like, what brings As for the Future into the now?
Right. Well, the thing that enabled us to start doing it oddly, I mean, it might have happened otherwise, but was the pandemic. So, I didn't know. Besides Brian, I didn't really know exactly who I wanted to be involved. I had a few ideas of who would be good to be involved. So David Lismy, the bass player, was someone that I'd played with. At our friend Xavier has a Ladies of Soul show that he does every Valentine's Day in New York, and so we played one of a couple of those shows. I mean, now it's like 10 years ago, and he's someone that I'd always wanted to play with. And there's a trombone player, Ryan Keberly, who's an amazing Brazilian jazz trombonist, and we played. We went to Cuba together. We went there. There was a trip that this musician, sort of musicologist, historian, Ned Sublett does. He will take people to Cuba and other places, and you'll get to see a lot of music, and it's an amazing trip. And I went twice, and the second time Ryan was there, and I sort of, we talked about music and traded music, and I knew that he would be someone I would want to be involved. But the tricky thing about, this project was like, people are busy. so everyone's got stuff. I mean, Ryan was extraordinarily and still is extraordinarily busy. And so because of the pandemic, a lot of people were just at home, and they were just, and they all had remote recording capabilities, and that was something I'd sort of worked out over the years. My the Appointees was mostly remote. And a good portion of my Carl Sandburg's Chicago Poems record was remote as well. And so we were all, that was, we could all do that. And so basically that summer, I guess it would have been July 2020, I started recording, I'll record a guitar track and a vocal track to a click track, and then I sent it off to Brian for drums, and then I sent it off to David for bass. And David said, you should see if we could get Mauro Refusco to play percussion. And I was like, I would love that, because I was aware of him. I knew that he played with David Byrne and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Atoms for Peace and all these groups, and so I was like, oh my God, that would be astounding. And he was into it, and so Mauro recorded a whole bunch of percussion tracks, and then Ryan did trombone, and then because of the way the songs were written, I had the idea of these should be a lot of group vocals. And so I would send tracks out to different friends who had, mic setups, and they would send them back with different vocal parts. And some would just be high and low octaves of a melody, but others might be 3 or 4 part harmonies. So basically the project was sort of hatched and continued to be mostly remote, which is so odd, considering how the music is all about it's a very sort of joyful collective kind of feel,
right?
But almost no one was in the same room with anyone else.
It definitely doesn't sound like that. It sounds like it's an in studio thing, which is incredible.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Which is incredible. For this technology and what we can do from the distance we're at, and especially at that time, in Cleveland, me and my crew here, we really found ourselves doing a lot of streams and helping venues stream and and doing a lot of benefits, and it ended up being the time that was most supposed to be distant we felt the
Yeah.
most communal, right? In the
Oh,
most
good.
like the bigger sense of being involved here, and then like hearing your story with that makes me feel like that might have been a similar outlet for you.
Totally. Absolutely. And being very conscious of, the musical style kind of representing what we were trying to do in terms of like reaching out and connecting with others, and making joyous music in difficult times, with others, even if they're not there. So
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Like so like with all these songs like that you're sending and pitching. What were the initial? Were they all done initially, or like?
let's see. We did. I mean, I want to say we started. We did 7. We did a first batch of 3, and then we did another batch of 4. One of which has since sort of fallen by the wayside. It was kind of a pandemic song, but I'm not. It was okay, but not.
I get what you mean. We got a lot of pandemic blues,
Yeah.
isolation
I just
blues.
basically had, yeah, so I had one that I was like, this, it felt really meaningful at the time, and then as time went on, I was like, I don't like this as much as the others. So, but we started with 6, and so 6 were done by basically the time stuff started to open up in the summer of 2021, and so, and then after that. We basically recorded another 4, and it was with a different drummer. My friend Ray Rizzo is playing drums for us, and still is. And so we started another 3 in the studio. Basic tracking with like guitar, bass, and drums. But then there's another song called "You Need Me More Than You Know," which is kind of like I would say of all the songs, it's sort of the most sort of samba-ish. And that's another kind of isolated one where like I just did guitar, Mauro did his percussion, Alexia Bontempo, who sings lead on that, did her vocal, and David did his bass. So I mean that one was done, but that's just because that's the sort of nature of that song. But that was how it all sort of happened. I think there was those sort of 3 or 4 songs, we started doing in 2022, and then the album was wrapped up. I mean, the mixing was done. Friend Daniel James Goodwin, who's based in Kingston, although I think he'll be in Virginia soon. And I've worked with him since the late 90s. He's mixed basically everything I've done, all the Nova Social recordings and my solo records. And so we finished mixing the record in, I want to say, October of 2022. We had all 10 songs done, and then another thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to get alternate versions of songs, and so I asked Daniel if he could make like 4 dub mixes, and so he did that as well, and those are really cool. The lead vocal is removed, with the exception of occasional sort of dubby effects. And there was sort of additional music stuff. So, like for instance, if Ryan played trombone on a track, he might have played some extra solos and stuff, and then I could incorporate those into the dub mixes. And so that was great. And then in a couple alternate versions that I never could have imagined, like the song "You Need Me More Than You Know," we had. There's an astounding Brazilian jazz guitarist here in New York named Vinicius Gomez, and he did these 2 guitar parts, like sort of jazzy rhythm part, and then a lead part, and they didn't entirely fit with the album version, but they worked amazingly on their own. And so we did this sort of kind of what I consider this sort of light samba mix, where it's just mostly his guitar and Alexia's vocal, and a little bit of Mauro's percussion, and a little bit of my harmonies, but that's sort of it. So, and one more just to briefly mention, which is we had a song called "Looking Around," which is the last song on the record, and Mauro did several percussion tracks that are just basically like kind of atmosphere, and we did a mix where it's just his percussion, and that's pretty wild. So.
That's like, it's interesting. Like, working with like kind of multiple musicians from afar, when you're not
Yeah.
like in the
Yeah.
studio with them. Like that's something my band's recently been doing, and it's a kind of fascinating thing to get like maybe not the thing you thought you instructed, like, oh, try this is what I'm thinking, and then they
Yep.
send you back something completely different, and like you're like,
Right.
that's actually kind of cooler. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and you
Yeah.
slowly fall way more in love with that take. And then when you
Yep.
get, like how you're saying, when you get alternative stuff, you're like, oh man, this is so sick, but this
Yeah.
isn't it. How do I like, I'm so grateful for this, like these 9 bars of like the shredding
Yeah.
or whatever. like,
Yeah.
and what do I do with that? So that's a really cool
Yeah.
outlet to have these alternative like these dub mixes, like that's a whole nother like kind of interesting like combination of like stylings, like
Yep.
that's so cool. What
Yeah, and I mean, and all you have to do is like, I mean, the main thing is you just have to commit to making it, rather than being like, oh, this would be great down the road or something. You just have to be like, no, we have to do this as well. So to sort of like raise it up to the level of importance of like a kind of album version of a song is sort of the key. Yeah.
That's it. Was it so like what because those are all going to come out with like the vinyl release, right? Or the like the release?
Those are going to be so the record is going to be available on digital, and it'll be available on vinyl, but then it'll also be a deluxe edition CD, which is actually funny. They're supposed to deliver it today. So
Yeah?
if the buzzer rings in the midst of our talking, you'll know what that is. But yeah, so it's a deluxe edition CD that'll be available, on release day, and then I think at some point, either before the end of the year or the beginning of next year, the deluxe edition tracks will be out and available on streaming and Bandcamp and everything.
All right. And everything's coming out in June 3rd? Or did I
June 14th.
June 14th.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
A little after, June 14th. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But so I don't want to give away but did a record Drop in the Forest, that one get like a dub remix? Because I can hear some of those lyrics being like dissected for like dub style.
It did, yeah.
Cool.
Although I will say this. I mean, unfortunately, I am giving it a bit away, but like we don't dive too much into the specific lyrics the way it is in the song. But the main lyric is kind of like this kind of like airy mantra that kind of like wafts throughout the song at various points.
On a side note, that song was like incredibly thoughtful and clever. I was listening, coming from
cool.
a musician standpoint. I'm like, the band campers. I get it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Oh, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, it's just. I mean, to me, it's just this this feeling that I don't know exactly why, but I just feel like a lot of musicians sort of feel that these days more than ever. So that was it. That's sort of where that song came from.
I agree. I think part of that is like, because at least before like the streaming aspect, when you would give someone your CD, it was already like, all right, someone's heard it. You know what I mean? As opposed to like with all the numeric like information, like in all the like multiple sources of streaming, right? Like, and then you put all this work and effort into this project, and like you're like, well, that many people listen to it. Shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and just the idea that there's this giant forest of people dropping stuff always, there's fruit and berries everywhere. Like, so that's what I mean. Like, that was a great metaphor for that.
Oh, cool.
Another thing I wanted to ask, the title for the group comes from a novel, right?
It does. Yeah.
So I don't know anything about the novel. Is it a Brazilian novel, or is it like?
It is. It's a Brazilian author named Clarice Lispector, and she was a very experimental writer of like stories and novels, and the name of the group, As for the Future, comes from her book, The Hour of the Star. She starts it off with like it's a very actually it's very like Jean-Luc Godard film type thing where it starts off as like this is the name of the book, or this, or this, or this, and she just lists like 8 different, what the book could be called, and one of them is As for the Future, and that just really grabbed me. I wanted to pick a name that was meaningful, but also had some connection to where the music came from, and so I thought, going back to this idea of literature and its importance, like I was like, well, this could be a cool place to sort of to go from.
And I also thought it was like, without the context, like kind of like As for the Future of some of this stylings of music now,
right,
in a different context, because like I've listened to like samba and bossa nova, and never really heard like songwriting in English over it, and so that I found that really cool, and I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Oh, cool!
And it was really cool. Like the whole group and the whole project is it's a really well done record, songwriting wise and musicianship wise, and I'm excited for everyone to be able to hear it. Are you guys doing any live performances? Like,
we have a release show the night that it comes out in New York. So we're going to be playing at Joe's Pub at the Public Theater on Friday, June 14th at 7 p.m. So that's our one show that we have booked for now, and then we'll see what else sort of follows after that. So but there'll definitely be more after that. So
very cool. And is it like how many? I mean, it can't be like everyone who tracked on it. Is it like?
Right.
or is it? I don't know. Like, is it like a boiled down
Right,
version,
yeah.
or like who
Right.
did you get? For
Well, because this is a release show, there's going to be a little bit more than we normally have. The sort of the version of the group that I think we've become pretty comfortable with is like a six person group. So it's like drums, percussion, bass, guitar and vocal, and trombone. And so that's kind of like, to me, that's the sort of like ideal minimum version of As for the Future. But for this show, the plan is to have at least another two or three, another 2 members. So it should be cool. And maybe some additional percussion and some keyboards. So
very cool, man. Well, Dave, I really appreciate your time and getting the dig into your career and your music.
Thanks for talking.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Sure.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.